The other night I was at a dinner party and things got incredibly uncomfortable.
One of those.
Yeah, exactly. It started over something so trivial, who was supposed to bring the wine? But within minutes, the tension in the room was just thick enough to cut.
I can picture it.
The husband sat there, jaw tight, staring at his plate in a total Stonewall. Meanwhile, his wife's voice took on this sharp, jagged edge.
And everyone else just pretends to be fascinated by their food.
We all did that awkward thing where you suddenly become very interested in your salad, waiting for the inevitable explosion or, the polite fake apology that ends the night.
Right.
But then something strange happened. After the initial heat, they didn't just move on or use those polished I feel statements you see in therapy books.
It wasn't clean.
It was raw, it was messy, and honestly, it was exhausting to watch. Yet by the time dessert came out, the air had cleared in a way that felt almost surgical. They weren't just fine, they were more synchronized than they had been all evening. It made me realize that we've been looking at these moments all wrong. We are conditioned to believe that a good relationship is a peaceful one, a series of cheap, polite signals designed to avoid friction.
But evolution doesn't really care about your peace.
Not at all. It cares about your survival. That uncomfortable, high-cost explosion I witnessed wasn't a system failure. It was a high-stakes stress test, a biological algorithm designed to verify if the other person is still all in when the psychological cost of staying is high. So why is it that the couples who never fight are often the ones closest to the edge? And why does our brain process a partner's silence not as a lapse in etiquette, but as a catastrophic signal of abandonment?
To understand why we fight, we have to stop looking at communication skills.
And start looking at the cold, calculating logic of the Pleistocene.
Exactly.
That opening story, it really gets to the core mission of this deep dive. You witness a raw, messy, high-stakes fight that somehow leads to greater synchronization, greater clarity. It completely contradicts the conventional wisdom.
It does. The idea that peace is the primary measure of relationship health. It's not the full picture.
So we're asking the big question. What if conflict wasn't a bug in the system, but a feature? What if evolution engineered conflict to be emotionally costly precisely because only high-cost behaviors are reliable enough to verify genuine long-term commitment?
That's the idea we're going to unpack. We're going to trace this from the high-stakes world of ancestral childcare all the way through to modern relationship lab data.
It's an essential reframing because we are constantly, whether we know it or not, searching for verifiable proof of our partner's intent.
Right. When we talk about emotional commitment from an evolutionary perspective, we're talking about a highly successful, evolved mating strategy. Natural selection favored partnerships that were robust enough to endure the immense time and resource costs necessary for human offspring to survive.
So our brains are basically hardwired to solve this problem.
We are. We're hardwired to solve the reproductive problem of ensuring a partnership endures. So our psychological systems developed a demanding requirement. We need verifiable proof of a long-term alliance. That means we are always, subconsciously, assessing resource commitment and the stability of offspring security.
And this is where something like parental investment theory comes in. It helps explain why emotional responsiveness, even angry responsiveness, can be such a critical biological signal.
It's the key to the whole puzzle.
So to really understand why our brains are so hyper-focused on verifying a partner's loyalty, we have to start with the foundational biology of it all. Parental investment theory, or PI theory.
It's really the cornerstone of evolutionary biology in this context. And its key insight is that the initial investment required for reproduction is vastly unequal between the sexes in humans.
Exactly.
And that inequality creates what we call differential risk. Parental investment is defined pretty broadly. It's any expenditure time, energy, resources, even survival risk that benefits the offspring but comes at a cost to the parent's ability to invest in other things.
Or other offspring.
Or other offspring, yes. The central tenet is straightforward. The sex that invests more in its offspring is the one that is necessarily more selective in choosing a mate.
And when you lay out the human biological investment, the sheer scale of that imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Let's just start with the female investment.
Okay.
A woman has high obligatory PI. This includes a fixed, non-negotiable 9-month, 38-week gestation period. During that time, she's diverting massive resources to the fetus, incurring health risks.
And losing the opportunity to reproduce again during that span.
Yeah.
It's a huge opportunity cost.
A huge one. Then after birth, you have the obligatory post-birth care, lactation, years of nurturing, and she starts with a fixed supply of ova that are irreplaceable.
And now contrast that staggering cost, a multi-year commitment with significant physical risk, with the male initial investment.
Biologically speaking.
Yes, just the initial biological investment. In terms of gametes, we're talking about a single effective sperm cell, and sperm is supplied at an incredibly high rate, something like 12 million per hour. Biologically, the initial cost to the male is, well, it's virtually negligible. So one interaction for a woman represents a potential massive multi-year investment. For a man, the minimum biological requirement is essentially zero. And that difference is the evolutionary engine driving selection strategy. Because the cost to the female is so immensely high in calories, in nutrients, in health risks, in opportunity cost evolution, intensely favored women who are hyper-selective in their mate choice.
The psychological mandate becomes, don't waste this investment.
Exactly. The driving psychological mandate is to ensure that this massive, obligatory biological cost is not rendered unnecessary or wasteful because the partner abandons the investment halfway through. This is why the psychological mechanism for securing verifiable emotional commitment from a mate became such a critical, non-negotiable survival tool.
But the magnitude of this psychological drive is only really understood when we look at the product of that investment. The human baby. Why are our young so incredibly expensive, far more so than those of other primates?
This is where we encounter the infamous obstetrical dilemma. It's a classic evolutionary compromise. It was created by two competing biological demands: human bipedalism and large brain size.
Walking on two legs and being smart?
Right. When our ancestors stood up and started walking on 2 feet, the necessary change in pelvic structure simultaneously narrowed the birth canal. But at the same time, hominin brains continued to grow exponentially.
So if the brain kept growing, but the exit door kept shrinking.
Precisely. If we waited for a human fetus's brain to reach the same level of neurological development in utero as other primates, the baby would simply be too large to pass through the birth canal. It would be a fatal complication for both mother and child.
A biological dead end.
So natural selection solved this by essentially forcing premature birth.
Premature in the sense that they are profoundly undeveloped compared to their cousins in the primate family.
Exactly. Human infants are born highly altricial, which is a term meaning helpless or undeveloped. To cope with this dilemma, humans give birth to babies whose brains are only about 25% developed.
25%. And what's the comparison?
Most other primates, like chimps or gorillas, give birth to offspring with brains that are 45 to 50% developed. They're essentially born halfway ready to go. Human babies are born needing years of intense external support just to catch up.
You're saying that the human fetus has to exit the womb functionally early just so it can fit? That means the real hard work of brain and body development has to happen outside, in the world.
Which exponentially raises the resource demand and the necessary duration of care. This extreme altriciality necessitates high investment, not only from the mother, but also from the community, what we call alloparental care.
Especially from the father.
And securing consistent, reliable paternal investment, the provisioning, the protection, the emotional reassurance, becomes absolutely essential for offspring survival. Without that expended high-cost commitment, the genetic legacy is highly vulnerable.
This highlights the core mechanism we mentioned earlier. The psychological drive for forming a long-term, emotionally bonded pair bond is fundamentally a defense mechanism.
It is a deep survival mechanism. It was developed over millions of years to ensure that essential high-cost provisioning and protection are secured for that highly dependent offspring. If you look at cross-cultural data, the desire women worldwide still exhibit for deep emotional commitment, to a far greater extent than men, is a clear reflection of this embedded evolutionary need.
It's all born from the vulnerability of the human infant.
That is the application of parental investment theory. It explains why emotional responsiveness serves as a critical biological signal for assessing long-term resource commitment and offspring security.
Okay, so we've established the intense biological need for long-term commitment, especially from the mate who isn't carrying that high initial biological cost.
Right.
Now we arrive at the million-dollar question. How does the ancient brain verify that commitment? If the promise of loyalty is crucial for survival, how do you sort the genuine allies from the opportunistic defectors?
This is where we leave PI theory and turn to the fascinating concept of costly signaling theory, or CST. The sources highlight what's called the commitment problem. If there is uncertainty about a partner's incentive to stay invested, that relationship is fundamentally unstable.
It's prone to collapse.
Right, because skepticism breeds withdrawal. If your survival depends on cooperation, you need reliable markers of loyalty.
It seems like in modern society, we prioritize low-cost signals. You know, being polite, sending a flowery text message, or buying a small expected gift. These are sort of the social lubricant of a functional relationship.
But these low-cost signals are exactly that, cheap. They're easy to imitate, and they are unreliable under duress. Anyone can be polite when things are going well or when they have nothing better to do.
But those signals are revealed to be worthless when the relationship hits real strain.
Catastrophic illness, job loss, the sheer grinding fatigue of raising multiple children. When the cost of the relationship spikes, the partner who is only committed under easy terms will defect.
So, for a signal of commitment to be credible, it must be so expensive in terms of time, resources, or personal pain that a deceptive agent, someone looking for an easy exit, would be unable or unwilling to send it.
That's the core logic. And this brings us right back to the high-intensity fight, the messy, raw conflict that modern therapists often tell us to avoid. Authentic emotional distress, the very thing you saw at the dinner table, functions as a costly signal.
That is genuinely counterintuitive. We're being told that incurring high costs, risking the relationship, is actually a sign of health, provided the relationship survives the test.
The biological logic is absolutely sound. Engaging in messy, raw, psychologically painful conflict is inherently high-cost behavior. It exposes you to the real, immediate risk of relationship dissolution. You risk severe personal pain, and you risk driving your partner away permanently.
So why would you do it if you weren't all in?
Why would a partner who is secretly looking for an exit, or who views the relationship as merely a stopgap until better options arrive, willingly incur that massive psychological price? They wouldn't. They would rely on cheap politeness and low-cost signals until they could slip away quietly.
The fight, therefore, isn't about the dirty dishes or the wine that was forgotten. It's a high-stakes stress test designed to verify the depth of the partner's investment. It verifies whether their commitment is conditional or unconditional.
This verification mechanism evaluating high-intensity conflict through costly signaling is crucial. We need to know what kind of commitment convention our partner operates under. As the sources point out, commitment signaling can evolve into two stable conventions.
Okay, what are they?
There's conditional commitment. I stay only if you respond favorably or if the immediate relationship benefits continue to outweigh my costs. This is the transactional mindset.
And then there's the high-cost commitment. Unconditional.
Unconditional commitment means I stay regardless of the immediate emotional return. I will incur the pain, I will sustain the argument because the long-term ancestral bond, the shared reproductive strategy, is the priority.
So when a partner stays and works toward repair after a big fight,
they are sending a powerful, non-falsifiable signal of unconditional commitment. The willingness to sustain the psychological cost of the conflict itself is the price of proof.
That makes my dinner party anecdote so much clearer. That couple, enduring the raw fight, wasn't failing to communicate. They were actively verifying at high psychological cost that both parties were still committed enough to endure the friction itself.
They were checking to see if there are unconditional agents.
Right.
And that generates a highly credible signal. Credibility allows both partners to make reliable predictions about future actions, which, for our ancient brain, is essential for ensuring the partnership endures long enough to support that altricial offspring. A partner who signals a lack of investment incentive by immediately withdrawing or refusing to engage instantly renders the alliance unstable. They have failed the stress test.
But, and this is the big but, if we're designed to use this high-stakes conflict to verify commitment, why does modern relationship science tell us that this very behavior is the fastest path to divorce? This is the point of tension we have to address next.
It's a huge tension.
So evolution sometimes requires us to face conflict head-on to verify commitment. But modern behavioral science shows us that the way we engage in conflict is often the system failure that leads to relationship death.
And to explore this, we have to turn to the immensely influential work of John Gottman and his cascade model of relational dissolution.
The Love Lab.
The Love Lab, yes. Gottman's research, conducted with Robert Levinson, was a landmark achievement because it moved past the limitations of relying on what people said about their relationships. self-report studies, and focused on objective, observational, and psychophysiological data.
Meaning they weren't just listing, they were measuring heart rate, skin conductance, monitoring stress hormones.
Exactly. They used sophisticated systems like the relationship conflict interaction coding system and the specific affect coding system. These technical tools allowed them to systematically code every single verbal and nonverbal exchange. A sigh, an eye roll, a statement of contempt, and correlate it with physiological stress markers.
From polygraphs, EKGs?
All of it. The groundbreaking insight was proving that relationship doom wasn't just a subjective feeling. It was a measurable physical phenomenon happening in the bodies of the couple during interaction.
And the predictive power of these observations was genuinely astonishing.
Their methodology allowed them to predict which couples would divorce or experience relational dissolution with up to 93% accuracy.
93%.
Based purely on observing just a few minutes of their conflict interactions. They identified a linear, predictable pattern of negative emotional displays that, once started, predictably leads to emotional withdrawal and eventual separation. And this pattern is structured around that famous metaphor, the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
The first horseman, the one that usually kicks off the destructive cascade, is criticism.
Right. Criticism is defined as an attack on the partner's character or personality. It goes beyond just lodging a complaint about a specific action.
So a complaint is, I'm upset the laundry wasn't done.
And criticism is, you are lazy and selfish because you never do the laundry. It involves using those broad, absolute statements like you never or you always. Their studies found that wives' criticism correlated particularly strongly with separation and dissolution.
And when you feel attacked on a fundamental level, the natural, almost reflexive response is the second horseman, defensiveness.
Defensiveness is the predictable shield that goes up against pervasive criticism. It's a protective behavior aimed at avoiding responsibility, immediately shifting blame, or launching a counterattack. It stems from a primal need to protect one's self-worth.
So you get those denials, the counter-accusations.
Even a whining tone. That's defensiveness. And Gottman and Levinson's research found defensiveness to be most strongly exhibited among men in their observational studies.
But the real emotional poison, the one that predicts relationship death with terrifying certainty, is the third horseman, contempt.
Contempt is devastating. It's the result of allowing criticism and defensiveness to fester unregulated. It's fundamentally driven by a complete lack of admiration and respect. It's the assertion of moral superiority over your partner.
You're implying they are beneath you.
Or not worth your time.
Yeah.
Contempt is expressed verbally through mockery, sarcasm, hostile humor, and non-verbally through unmistakable signals like eye-rolling, scoffing, or sneering. It's a total psychological rejection.
And why is contempt the strongest single predictor of dissolution?
Because it signals to the ancient, survival-focused part of the brain that the partner doesn't view you as a worthy, capable co-parent or co-investor. It undermines the very foundation of the pair bond. The studies found contempt to be the strongest single predictor of relational dissolution overall. It's a behavior that screams, I am better than you, and therefore I don't need to stay committed to you.
And when contempt becomes the norm, the receiving partner has only one remaining strategy, total withdrawal. Which brings us to the fourth and final horseman, stonewalling.
Stonewalling is the final desperate phase of the cascade. It involves creating both mental and physical distance to avoid the conflict entirely, effectively shutting down the communication channel.
Yeah.
The partner appears busy, unresponsive, disengaged.
Or just gives you grunts.
Exactly. This sounds exactly like the husband at the dinner table, jaw tight, staring at his plate.
Textbook manifestation.
And the research found stonewalling to be most common among men. It's extremely challenging to redirect because the partner has physically and psychologically checked out. From an evolutionary perspective, stonewalling is the most catastrophic signal of all.
Why?
It is total unresponsiveness, a complete denial of the partner's emotional and physical needs. It's processed by our ancient brain as the ultimate primal signal of abandonment.
Let's discuss the internal mechanism that drives a person to stonewall. Emotional flooding. What is the physical experience of being flooded?
Emotional flooding is a true physiological crisis. The partner feels intensely overwhelmed. You're registering a heart rate above 100 beats per minute, coupled with a surge of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. Your nervous system flips into a defensive fight-or-flight mode.
So it's not a choice?
Critically, no. When this happens, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain for rational thought, for listening, it literally begins to shut down.
So the flooded person isn't consciously choosing to be rude. Their system has hit a mental circuit breaker and is physically incapable of processing the argument productively.
Exactly. They're in survival mode, not communication mode. The destructive loop occurs because the non-flooded partner often misinterprets this physiological shutdown as a conscious, malicious act.
They think the Stonewaller just doesn't care.
And that misunderstanding increases hostility and drives both parties further into isolation, accelerating the cascade toward dissolution.
But understanding this physical reality gives us actionable ways to mitigate flooding.
It does. Since the core problem is the high heart rate and neurological overload, we have to intentionally regulate the nervous system. The simplest intervention is taking mandatory physical breaks during conflict. The sources suggest at least 20 minutes.
Let the body calm down.
Allow the body to metabolize the stress hormones and return to a baseline state where rational discussion is possible. Another interesting finding is that resolving highly controversial issues via text or voice instead of face-to-face can sometimes allow individuals greater control over their emotional expression.
It reduces the chance of hitting that critical flooding threshold.
Precisely.
So if the four horsemen are the destroyers, the absolute essential element for marital stability, the antidote to the cascade, is the repair attempt.
A repair attempt is everything one partner tries to do to de-escalate the situation and bring the tension level back down. It might be subtle, a bit of self-deprecating humor, a statement like, "We're a team, let's solve this," or an inside joke that momentarily breaks the tension.
But it's not enough just to make the attempt.
No. The research emphasizes that accepting a repair attempt is arguably the single most vital variable for marital stability and maintaining affection. If you reject the outstretched hand, the system fails.
Now let's clarify the distinction between destructive and merely stable conflict patterns, because the key takeaway from Gottman's work isn't that you shouldn't fight, but that you must maintain a very specific balance.
That's right. Marital stability, regardless of the couple's inherent style, is not achieved by the total exclusion of negative behavior. It's about balance and regulation. Gottman found that stable marriages maintain a crucial positive to negative comment ratio of at least 5-to-1.
5-to-1.
So even if you are having a heated, messy argument, you must compensate for every negative interaction with 5 times as many positive, neutral, or softening interactions to restore psychological security.
And this ratio holds true across different fighting styles, right? So let's look at those stable fighting styles. First, the validators.
Validators are generally seen as the therapeutic ideal. They mix moderate amounts of positive and negative affect. They tend to validate their partner's feelings and are highly focused on shared experiences and mutual respect. They manage the stress well.
Then we have the avoiders.
Avoiders mix very small amounts of both positive and negative affect. They prioritize peace by minimizing conflict pain and avoiding emotional drama. The risk they run is the gradual development of loneliness and emotional distance, because they rarely attempt to persuade or genuinely engage with each other's issues.
So their stability comes at the cost of deep intimacy.
In many cases, yes.
And finally, the group that ties directly back to the loud, messy couple at the dinner party, the volatiles.
Volatiles are fascinating because they represent that high-cost, high-reward relationship. They mix high amounts of positive and high amounts of negative affect. These are the passionate, romantic marriages that seem constantly on the verge of dissolution. They engage in high levels of persuasion right from the first minute of conflict.
But they stay together. How?
So they achieve deep, long-term stability, precisely because they massively compensate for the high-cost conflict, that stress test, with massive positive affect and humor. They hit the 5-to-1 ratio.
So, my dinner party couple fighting over the wine likely belongs to the volatile type. They are constantly testing commitment through high-stakes fighting, but they are equally constant in repairing the bond.
They're paying the price of proof. They prove their unconditional commitment through the messy conflict, but they immediately restore the psychological security needed for survival by overwhelming the relationship with positive affection and repair. The system is stressed, but immediately reinforced.
The moment we try to apply these ancient high-stakes commitment verification algorithms to modern life, we hit a wall. Our brain, designed for the Stone Age, is struggling to cope with the environment we've created. This is the core of evolutionary mismatch.
It's the psychological equivalent of craving fat and sugar in a world where those things are cheaper and more accessible than vegetables. That impulse was adaptive when resources were scarce in the Pleistocene, but today it leads to chronic health issues.
And our relationship strategies are the same way.
Exactly. They were designed for small tribes and clear resource scarcity, and now they're fundamentally confused by modern societal structures.
Let's detail the 5 major ways the ancestral past clashes with modern mating, starting with the shift in community size.
Okay, the first mismatch is scaling up small community psychology to the colossal modern society. We evolved to thrive in tight-knit groups, often maxing out at around 150 people, the famous Dunbar's number.
In that world, everyone knew everyone.
Everyone was known, accountability was immediate, and meaningful relationships were organically facilitated. We relied on kin and lifelong community members for judgment.
But now we try to apply that deep community psychology to massive, sprawling social networks.
Which results in a paradox. We are surrounded by thousands of people, yet many relationships feel superficial and hollow. The downside is that our large networks, particularly on social media, provide platforms for influence from anonymous or distant individuals who have no real stake in our well-being.
And they encourage breakups over small things.
They can, and often do, encourage partners to break up over minor transgressions, offering easy outs. In the ancestral past, outside influence came from kin, whose genetic success was tied to yours. Today, it's often from outsiders, whose motivations are entirely transactional or fleeting.
That concept of disappearing ties directly into the second mismatch, anonymity and the rise of ghosting.
In the ancestral environment, whether a partner was a long-term co-parent or a short-term liaison, they remained spatially present within the community. You could not simply vanish. Accountability was built into the system because your reputation was critical.
But now you can just disappear.
Large modern societies make it easy to retain anonymity and disappear from people's lives entirely. And our evolved psychology simply doesn't have a script for that.
What do you mean?
Ghosting, the act of disappearing without explanation, violates the deeply embedded evolutionary expectation that partners remain nearby, accountable, and responsive. When someone ghosts, it triggers a profound, unresolved psychological trauma because the brain is left without the necessary closure to assess the threat or calculate future strategy. It registers as a complete, inexplicable abandonment.
A scenario our ancient system was simply not designed to process.
Not at all.
Mismatch number 3 relates to the sheer autonomy we now have in mate selection, specifically foregoing the wisdom of elders.
For the vast majority of human history, mate choice was not a solitary, highly emotional decision. Family, kin, or elders often had a significant hand in the process. This provided a crucial adaptive shortcut. Those with years of experience could assess resource stability, community standing.
Things a young person in love might not see.
Far faster than a pair of young people blinded by infatuation. But today, we operate entirely alone.
And this forces modern individuals into highly complex, often painful trial and error learning. We have to figure out how to navigate attraction, discover our own deep-seated preferences, identify complex red flags, determine long-term compatibility, all through a grueling process of self-discovery and failed relationships.
It makes the path to forming a stable, high-investment pair bond far steeper and more emotionally costly than it was ancestrally.
The fourth mismatch is the phenomenon we call delayed adulting.
Modern Western society delays key life stages significantly. People are delaying marriage, putting off having children, leaving home much later than their ancestors. In the ancestral past, a person in their early 20s was usually a seasoned parent, and their own parents were young and robust enough to provide considerable help.
That changes the entire dynamic of investment.
Fundamentally, when couples put off settling down, they change the resource allocation timeline. Today, a significant portion of couples find themselves caring for highly dependent young children and aging parents simultaneously.
The sandwich generation.
Exactly. This creates an enormous, unprecedented strain on resources, time, and emotional energy, a stress configuration that our evolved psychological mechanisms for pair bonding were never designed to manage.
And the final, highly relevant mismatch in the dating landscape: information overload.
Mate choice in the Pleistocene was limited to a very small pool of viable candidates within the immediate vicinity. You had maybe a dozen options max.
Now you have a dating app with thousands.
Selecting from a massive, endless, constantly refreshing pool of suitors is a radically new cognitive challenge. The human mind deals with an overwhelming number of choices very poorly. It's the paradox of choice, applied to finding a partner.
Right.
And this can lead to two counterproductive strategies. First, people might adopt abnormally, unrealistically high standards just to cognitively manage and cut down the sheer number of options.
So they're looking for an impossibly perfect partner and missing out on good, viable mates.
Or second, They might feel so utterly overwhelmed by the endless options that they freeze, resulting in decision paralysis and inactivity. In both cases, the massive modern environment obstructs the fundamental evolutionary goal of securing a viable, high-quality partner.
This brings us back to emotional expression. If conflict is necessary for commitment verification, then how do we know when the expression of negative emotion is constructive versus destructive? Beyond the hard arithmetic rule of the 5-to-1 ratio, what does the science say about negative expressions?
Well, the initial assumption is that all negative expression is harmful, but recent research suggests a more nuanced picture. While the expression of positive emotions, humor, affection, shared joy is universally correlated with higher relationship satisfaction, the expression of negative emotions is not always purely detrimental.
So sometimes letting your partner see you angry or vulnerable is actually a positive signal.
It implies that vulnerability and the sharing of authentic, deeply held internal states may be necessary components of intimacy and deep bonding. The key insight here is security. In a deep, high-investment relationship, what we call a communal relationship, the expectation is that partners will prioritize each other's welfare and be authentic.
So hiding your feelings is bad.
Habitual suppression of negative emotions is strongly associated with lower satisfaction in these communal relationships because it fosters a sense of inauthenticity.
But the research points to a crucial filter that determines if that negative expression is functional or damaging. The explanation variable.
This is the essential cognitive bridge. The expression of negative emotions leads to significantly higher relationship satisfaction if that negative expression is accompanied by a cogent, clear explanation for the negativity. This makes the partner's behavior lawful and predictable.
Meaning, I'm not angry because I hate you. I'm angry because I'm overwhelmed by work, and when you didn't do the dishes, I felt totally unsupported.
Exactly. When the partner understands the narrative behind the emotion, they are no longer left guessing why they are being attacked. This predictability increases psychological security and intimacy. It converts the emotional cost, the fight, into actionable, reliable information.
So let's look at the flip side of that. Emotional suppression. Why is trying to be the nice one and strategically holding back emotional disclosure often so damaging in deep relationships?
Emotional suppression, especially when it becomes habitual and chronic, violates the inherent expectation of intimacy and communal care that defines a high-investment romantic relationship. Chronic suppression fosters a strong sense of inauthenticity and harms intimacy by violating that expectation of transparency.
And your partner can feel it, even if you don't say anything.
Studies have shown that when individuals habitually suppress emotion, their partners report an uncomfortable state of arousal, sensing that something is wrong, coupled with a lack of rapport. This makes the partner unwilling to engage further.
So trying to keep the peace by suppressing emotional disclosure actually pushes the partner away and decreases rapport, the exact thing you were trying to avoid.
It does. It signals that you are unwilling or unable to share your internal state, which undermines the feeling of being all in that the relationship requires for survival. Now, strategic situational suppression, used judiciously to accommodate a partner in a non-chronic way, that may be momentarily helpful. But chronic suppression harms the fundamental relationship dynamics.
It's a pattern that erodes the foundation.
And the sources indicate that attachment styles are highly relevant here. Individuals with more avoidant attachment styles are generally much more likely to be chronic users of emotional suppression. Conversely, a secure attachment style is related to less emotional suppression. It highlights how our capacity for openness is deeply rooted in our earliest experiences.
We began with a couple at a dinner party who had a messy, high-cost fight that surprisingly resolved into greater synchronization. We've traced that raw emotional expenditure back to the deep biological mechanisms of commitment verification.
Driven by the intense demands of human parental investment and the logic of costly signaling.
And we found that while the impulse to engage in high-stakes conflict is an evolved mechanism to verify unconditional commitment, modern psychological failure, specifically the uncontrolled use of the 4 Horsemen, especially contempt, can make that ancient survival mechanism lethal to the relationship.
So the challenge lies not in eliminating the stress test, but in managing its aftermath.
The volatile couples, those passionate fighters like the pair at the dinner party, they really demonstrate the successful integration of these two realities. They prove that the fight itself is not the flaw. The lack of repair is the flaw.
Right. The messiness is the price of proof.
But the synchronization is the reward of safety.
That's the final synthesis. The stable, volatile couples manage to balance the emotional expenditure necessary for long-term survival. They paid a high price of proof by engaging in the messy, risky conflict, thereby satisfying that ancient psychological need for commitment verification.
They're proving they are unconditional agents who will not defect under stress.
But, crucially, they compensate for that high cost by overwhelming the relationship with positive affect and consistent repair attempts, ensuring they successfully maintain that 5-to-1 positive to negative ratio.
So they're constantly proving their long-term investment through the painful stress tests.
But they immediately and consistently restore the vital psychological security necessary for an enduring partnership designed for survival. The messiness is simply the necessary and verifiable price of that unconditional proof.